Let's deep dive the Romans. Welcome to Shiny Boots. Before I show you these mighty fine walls, let's look at some maps so you can get an idea of the area that this wall covered. These are the areas that show up when you do a little search. And when you look at an old map, you can get an idea of where exactly the wall went round the city. And we are starting around Cripplegate. Here we go. This wall was built apparently in 200 AD. It measures 2 miles around the city of Londinium and had 7 gates. The space enclosed within the walls is around 330 acres, so roughly 33 football pitches. And it goes underground. This is just the top of the wall. Moving on. This section of the wall originally formed the northern side of the Roman fort, built in 120 AD. The defences were completely rebuilt in the early medieval period, and most of the surviving stonework dates to this time. Okay, so this section was built in 120 AD, and the rest of it was built 80 years later. Oh no, they can't get the story straight. The modern lake indicates the approximate position of the medieval ditch, which then contained a great store of very good fish of diverse sorts. And there you can see the battlements of the city wall in the churchyard of St. Giles. Yeah, before they demolished it, they were hanging up all of their laundry on the wall. Ah, so that engraving is the top of the wall. There's so much of the wall that is missing, height-wise, and obviously it goes further down. And yeah, by 410, the city of Londinium is abandoned and everything falls into ruin. After Londinium, we have the Anglo-Saxon period. A lovely person in the comments mentioned that before London was Londinium, it was apparently called Troia Noah. So I asked my chatty friend, and it says the short answer is Trinovantum, and it was a legendary name said to have referred to London before it became Londinium. But it's mythological, not historical. Remember that, yeah? The myth of Trinovantum, Troia Nova, or New Troy, comes from Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britanniae, 1136. It was a medieval pseudo-historical chronicle that tried to trace British history back to the fall of Troy. So there's this myth that London or Londinium was called New Troy, but then it later morphed linguistically into Trinovantum. But it's all legendary, yeah? There's no archaeological or linguistic evidence that the city was ever called Trinovantum. The myth probably arose because there was a real Iron Age tribe in southeast Britain called the Trinovantes. Trinovantes, Trinovantum. Got me thinking back to Latin with the third declension. Trinovantes could be a plural nominative. Trinovantum, genitive of the Trinovantes. No. That's pseudoscience. Pseudo-historical. There is linguistically no connection at all. So then I ask, who were the Trinovantes tribe then? I also wanted to point out that instead of starting with Trinovantes, who were a real tribe, ChatGPT decided to tell me about the imaginary one that isn't real. And it doesn't understand my sarcasm. I say, beginning with it's all a myth, then turns out there was a similar named place, ? Beautifully put. It starts out as a myth and then unexpectedly turns out to have roots in something real. And then again reiterates that none of this is true historically, but turns out there was something real. Centuries later, archaeologists and classical historians noticed something intriguing. Roman writers like Julius Caesar in De Bello Gallico from 54 BCE mentioned a real Iron Age tribe called the Trinovantes. I love this bit. So the coincidence of names, Trinovantum and Trinovantes, is striking. Geoffrey probably borrowed the tribal name and wove it into his myth, turning a known Iron Age people into the supposed founders of London. Known? It just said we didn't know who they were. So who's Geoffrey of Monmouth then? So he was a Christian clergyman. He wrote the Historia Regum Britanniae, which is the history of the kings of Britain. And he speaks about Britain's historical ties with Troy. And apparently this was taken as fact up until the 16th century. And then apparently it became pseudo-historical. I'll leave a link to the translated version in the sources so you can have a little read. But I did find this bit quite interesting. It is lastly inhabited by 5 different nations: the Britons, Romans, Saxons, Picts, and Scots. I feel like the history I've been taught doesn't have the Romans and the Saxons and the Britons all here at the same time. In the mainstream narrative, at least. I decided to double check it. So they all overlapped roughly for 60 years. And that's essentially when Londinium is abandoned, isn't it? What if we all were living side by side for longer than 60 years? And from 410, the Romans just completely disappear? They no longer exist? And then the Saxons are who are now the inhabitants of Britannia. Realised I didn't know who the Picts were. Tattooed savages, indigenous to Scotland, who just disappeared at some point during the 10th century. That image reminds me of Kali, the goddess in Hindu mythology. They used to fight naked in Scotland. One last thing I'd like to cover before we depart is the fact that the word Roman or roman in French means book. It's a novel. It literally means to account a story. And our pal Geoffrey of Monmouth, turns out they don't really know what language he spoke. He could well have spoken French, as that was the language that was spoken by the elites. What if the Romans are just one big roman, a tale as old as Troy? Thank you all for watching. I'll be doing a part 2 on Londinium because I have more footage. If you know of any other sources I should take a look at, let me know in the comments. Like and share with your friends, and I'll catch you in the next one.